sing for you a song today called Windmills. And I learned it 40 years ago from Andy O'Brien from County Kerry, who was playing at that time in a group called the Irish Tradition. Billy McComiskey, Brenda and Andy O'Brien. And they were a lovely band. And they played at a time when, as Barney McKenna used to say, we played music when it was dangerous. That was the rough approximation of Barney McKenna of the Dubliner's accent. And he kind of piled it on a bit. He was a very smart man, but he would pile on the Dublin accent when he needed to. And what he meant by that was that people were unfamiliar with it for the most part, and especially in pubs. Now, music and singing were mostly banned in pubs when I was growing up in Ireland. It was thought by the pub owners that once the song would start, the fight would be next, or some kind of disorder. And funnily enough, after folk music went through a big revitalisation period in the 1960s, I was very delighted to be part of that. Sparked off by the Clancy brothers and Tommy Makem in New York City, starting off in Greenwich Village. And we discovered our own songs over again, when I say we, the people of Ireland. And they mostly did it at that time in pubs. And the very same pub owners who'd be telling you to shut up if you sang were now paying you to sing. Did many gigs in pubs myself. And at that time, the pubs were very noisy and people wouldn't listen that much. And if you didn't do what they wanted, the owner would come up to you and say, look, you're not doing what the punters want. And we took pleasure in being fired from pubs. It was kind of a badge of honour. I was in a group called the Emmett Folk Group with a fellow called Brian Bolger from Wexford and Donal Lunny from Kildare. But anyway, in America, the pub scene started really in the 1970s, the Irish pubs, with music. They were everywhere. And after a few years, Washington, D.C., one in Philadelphia where I lived, the Plough and the Stars, many in New York. And singers would come out from Ireland once the ballad boom, as we called it, had ended in the 60s. Many of the singers came from Belfast and Dublin, other parts of Ireland, to make their living in America. They were kind of hooked on it, and you would be. Now, you have to sing again what the punters wanted, and often that was the Clancy brothers and Tommy Makem's repertoire. And some of the bands started to develop their own. The Irish Tradition was one of those bands that had a mixture of beautiful jigs and reels, top instrumental players, Billy McComiskey and Brendan Mulvihill. You could find no better. And Andy O'Brien, who was a very solid pub singer, and he loved to sing and always had a good ear for good songs. And I met them down in Washington, playing in Washington, D.C. in a pub called the Dubliner. And I was very honoured when they asked me to produce their first album, which we made up in Buchanan, Connecticut. And it was called The Corner House. And Andy O'Brien sang Windmills. I think he'd learned it from Liam Clancy and Tommy Makem, who also had a great ear for good songs. And I sang the harmony on it, and then more or less I forgot all about it. And recently I remembered it again and started doing it just myself here, and in the key of F, and said, God, that sounds great. And then I called up Billy McComiskey and said, would you play Windmills with me if I did it? And he said, I would, of course. And he had to relearn his part. He made up a lovely instrumental part. Had to relearn it. I kind of had to relearn it too. I never actually sang the song as a lead singer. Delighted to do it now, and in honour of the Irish Tradition and all the great times that we had together touring different parts of the country and all the development we got up to. The song was written by a man that I admired a lot when I was in England with the Johnstons, and he was a native of the Lancashire area in the scenic northwest of England. He was a singer and a songwriter. He wrote that song, very famous song, Bread and Fishes, which went to #1 in the Irish hit parade. It's a beautiful, beautiful song. And it's sung by a lot of choirs, in fact, today. It's part of the school curriculum in England. Alan Bell was also a folk music organiser, and he organised the Filed Festival in the year 1973 when I left for America, so I never got to play it. And he did that in Liverpool. And he was a member of a famous group called the Taverners. And he's left a great legacy. He died at the age of 84 and left behind a wonderful personal legacy. A very loved man. I met him very briefly once when I was with the Johnsons up there. But anyway, he wrote this song, Windmills. And I love the imagery of it. We didn't have too many classic windmills in Ireland. We had a lot of mill towns. In fact, there's so many mill towns in Ireland you couldn't count them. And you needed, of course, mills for the grinding of corn. And they were all over the place. But the classic windmills were mostly associated with England, Scotland, Wales and Spain. and the Netherlands. There's one great windmill in Ireland. It looks wonderful, the Blennerville windmill. That if you're driving down to the town of Dingle, you're just outside Tralee, you'd come to it. I've always stopped and looked at it. It's so wonderful. But these are kind of residues. Now we have modern windmills in Ireland, and it produces a lot of our electricity supply. Kind of controversial because the environmental impact, especially in wildlife, sometimes on bogs. But I think everyone would agree, is better than the nuclear option. So they're here to stay in Ireland, and the song is here to stay. And it gives me great pleasure to sing it with three of my favourite musicians: Billy McComiskey, back doing Windmills after 40 years; Brenda from County Meath and Concertina; and Hayley Richardson from North Carolina. Windmills. In days gone by, when the world was much younger, men harnessed the wind to work for mankind. Seamen built tall ships to sail over the ocean, while landsmen built mills the corn for to grind. And around and around and around went the big sails, turning the shafts and the great wooden wheels. Creaking and groaning, the millstones kept turning, grinding to flour the good corn from the fields. In Flanders and Spain and the lowlands of Holland, in the kingdoms of England, Scotland and Wales, windmills sprang up all along the wild coastline, ships of the land with their high canvas sails. And around and around and around went the big sails, turning the shafts and the great wooden wheels. Creaking and groaning, the millstones kept turning, grinding to flour the good corn from the fields. In Lancashire, lads worked hard with the good earth, ploughing and sowing as the seasons declared, waiting to reap up the rich golden harvest, while the miller he toiled his mill to repair. And around and around and around went the big sails, turning the shafts and the great wooden wheels. Creaking and groaning, the millstones kept turning, grinding to flour the good corn from the fields. Windmills of old wood blackened by weather, windmills of stone layering white in the sun, windmills like giants all ready for tilting, windmills that died in the gales and are gone. And around and around and around went the big sails, turning the shafts and the great wooden wheels. Creaking and groaning, the millstones kept turning, grinding to flour the good corn from the fields. Grinding to flour the good corn from the fields.